Welcome back to another edition of Barefoot Bonsai, and today we have a lot to talk about. I have several things to show you, and we have a project I'm going to be working on. So today's theme is the gift that keeps on giving, and I will go into a little bit further what that means exactly. So right now I want to start with this really interesting specimen. This is a crown of thorns. This is a dwarf crown of thorns. Also, as you'll notice, it's spinning. So I had alluded to tools of the trade when it comes to bonsai. This is one of my favorite tools. This is the Lazy Susan. However, here in my garden it is the Busy Susan because this Susan works a lot for me. So rather than having to spin my plant around with my hands as I'm working on it, I can literally just spin the tabletop here like a record player and move it around. So super cool plant. This is the, like I said earlier, this is the dwarf crown of thorns, and if we get a nice close-up here, you will see that this is also a host to some epiphytes. We have some lichen growing on here. I've had this so long outdoors, and here in the deep south the lichen will grow on just about anything. I also have on the back side here a couple clumps of Tillandsia. So this spiny, rough bark is a perfect place for these lichens and these Tillandsia to grow. So these are types of air plants. These are plants that grow on top of other things. And to me, what is most interesting about these types of plants, the lichens, we'll start with the lichens, is that lichens are actually two different organisms that have a symbiotic relationship. It's a fungus and an algae, and neither one of them could live on top of a plant or a rock or a log unless they were together. So algae needs water and the fungus needs soil, but together they give each other what they need so they can live out of their natural habitat, so to speak, and grow on top of other things and get their nutrients in different ways. We're not going to go into all of the cool aspects of those plants, but just a little highlight. Now, the Tillandsia is what people call Spanish moss here in the south. Long silver strands, long clumps of the Tillandsia that grow on top of the oaks primarily, but also other types of trees. You'll see them on the crepe myrtles and magnolias as well as any tree that can get a root on. But they're air plants, so they don't technically take anything away from the plants. However, I am going to have to clean this up a little bit at some point, and we'll do a video on that, because what happens is they grow over the bark. And on all plants there are dormant buds from which new branches, new leaves, new growth can form. And if these mats of plants grow too thick or too densely over the surface of the plant, it can keep new growth from happening. So it doesn't take anything away from the plant, but it can keep things from happening on the plant. And that can actually be a slow death for a plant. So there is going to be a point to where I'm going to clean this up a little bit in specific places. I'll leave some of it on there to kind of enhance the look and the age of the plant, because here in the deep south there's certainly lots of lichen and lots of Tillandsia growing here, and so I think it's appropriate for where I am, where I'm gardening, to use a little element of that on my specimens here. So I'm going to set this aside. This is actually, okay, so the gift that keeps on giving. So let me start now, because this is a plant that a friend of mine gave me before he moved to Oregon. He couldn't take care of it there. He had other priorities that he was getting into. However, he knew how much I love plants. He knew how much I love this particular plant that he had. I've had this in my possession for about 6 years. I think he had it maybe 4 or more before that. And he wasn't really doing much to it, and I really haven't done much to it. This is literally the form that this plant has taken on its own. And I'm just going to spin it a little bit, but you see it has a nice kind of cascade or semi-cascade form in the bonsai world. This would be more of like a semi-cascade. And I haven't done a lot really to it. I don't think I've done anything to it other than water it and feed it and give it plenty of sunshine and making sure that it dries out very well between waterings. Okay, it does not like to stay wet. But this is a really cool plant that takes on a really nice form on its own. So I am going to do some cuttings. I'm going to clean this up. So look forward to another video where we're going to focus on this plant. We're going to clean it up. I'm going to do some training. I'm going to do some pruning, take some cuttings from it, and put this more into a official kind of bonsai training program. But that's going to be for another date. Set that up to the side. Now these here are 2 cuttings from dwarf crown of thorns, and these are not from this plant. These are from a plant that we had at the garden center at Earthworks, and it is a dwarf variety that I did not have, and so I took a couple cuttings off the plants, and these have been in pots for a couple months, and they have rooted in, I think, pretty well, because I haven't seen any dieback. I've actually seen a little bit of new growth, some new leaves coming on here, so they're doing well. I've been keeping them in dappled sunlight, filtered light for a while, but I am going to be transitioning them to more and more sun as we head into the winter, and I will be prepared to protect them if we have any frosty weather, anything 32 degrees and below. I'm going to protect these, bring them up toward the house under the overhang here at the back of the wall here in the garden, or if it gets too cold, I will bring them indoors. So these are some cuttings from Crown of Thorns, and these are a white flowering variety. So I have a red, I did not have a white, so I'm going to be training these specifically as bonsai. So I have 3 individuals in this pot, 2 individuals in this pot, and I will train them as individuals into the future as well. All right, so Crown of Thorns. So the gift that keeps on giving is when you're a plant lover like me and you have friends that know you're a plant lover, and they have to move or they can't take care of a plant anymore, you're usually the first person they go to help them take care of their plants. So with that said, I'm going to introduce you to another plant that came back to me. So this is one of my old Portulaca. I mean old that I had trained this a long time ago and put it in this pot for a beginner bonsai to be sold at Earthworks. And a gentleman came in and purchased it. He loved it. He gave it as a gift. The person who he gifted it to came in and she asked me for some advice on care, tips, so on and so forth, how she can take care of it, because she loved the gift that she was given. But now she's moving to California, and I didn't ask her too many questions because I knew she didn't want to part with it, but she was told by somebody, and probably, I don't know who it was, but she was told that she couldn't bring it with her. So I didn't want to argue with her, but she wanted to give it to her daughter-in-law. So now, before I give it back to her daughter-in-law, I am going to today give this a good once-over. I'm going to take it out of its pot. I'm going to inspect the roots. I'm going to do a serious pruning on this. I'm going to keep all the cuttings, of course, to start new plants. And then not do a lot of styling today, but I'm going to do a lot of pruning. And I'm going to hopefully dissuade a lot of your fears. If you have fears of cutting plants and pruning plants, I'm going to show you just how much you can take off a plant and not be afraid to do so. All right, so this is an old plant of mine that has come back to me. It is a gift that keeps on giving. And by the way, I did call her daughter-in-law over a week ago and she has not responded to me. So this may be the gift that keeps on staying. I'm not sure, but we'll find out. But I'm hoping that she'll respond to me. I'll reach out to her again and hopefully she'll take possession of this really nice specimen. If you look at it close, the nabari, which are the surface roots here, are very pronounced. Now, there has been some rotting going on. This is what I was concerned about when she brought it into me. There's some roots that aren't looking real healthy here on the surface, which is a shame. But I fear that she was over-loving this plant. And over-loving your plant, if you only have one plant, we talked about this in an earlier video, if you only have one plant to give all your attention to, sometimes you can actually cause more problems by giving it too much attention. And I think that she watered it way too often. So we're gonna see what happens. I'm gonna pull out the pot and we're gonna look at the roots, and that's the first thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take some of this gravel off the top before I take it out. So she also told me that she was not watering it. Was not fertilizing it as much as she should have. So the first thing I did when I got it back home was to feed it. So hopefully after this severe but needful pruning that I'm going to give it, it will respond with lots of new growth. So we'll see what happens here, and if the owner of this, the new owner, does not take possession of it, then I guess I'll be able to do an update with you to show you how it comes back from its pruning. Now, we are heading into winter, so that update might be much later, but I will keep you posted if I can. All right, I got most of the gravel out, so I'm going to set this back down. The soil is still moist, so the roots are still moist. So I'm going to grab my handy chopsticks, another very important tool, and I'm just going to go around the edges here and kind of poke down into it just to loosen up the grip of any roots that may be on the sides. So that when I give it its first tug, I shouldn't come across too much resistance. Now this is a beginner pot, and you can tell it's a beginner pot, first of all, because it's glazed. Beginner pots are usually glazed, and they are also much deeper than what you see in most traditional bonsai pots. But that's okay. Beginner pots are important for people who are becoming interested in this art form, and so usually I put most of these into beginner pots because where we are here in Northeast Florida, we don't have a huge culture of bonsai, and so we don't have a lot of people who are experienced, and so it's usually best to put them in a beginner pot. All right, well, that came out rather easily. I'm going to turn it on its side here so I can look at the roots. Not too much to see right away, but I am going to loosen this soil up. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to pour that in there. I did put down my trash bag, which makes for easy cleanup. I'm just going to begin loosening the soil. Now this may take a while, so depending on how long this takes in real time, we may speed this part of the video up so you don't have to sit here and watch me poke at this the whole time. But what I want to do is I want to get this soil off so I can look at the roots. There's no way I'm going to know if I have rotting roots in the middle here unless I get the soil away. So I'll scrape away the soil as gently as possible. And sometimes I just give it a little shake. Starting to see more of the roots. And every so often, another shake. So far, so good. And what you don't know is that I can feel where this chopstick is going into it. I'm not really feeling a whole lot of big, large roots that may be in the middle, which is kind of good. So I remember before I potted this, I had, as I was training it, removed any of the large roots that might be throughout the bottom and only kept the smaller, fine feeder roots. And I am losing some there, so there's some that were kind of rotted off, some small ones, unfortunately. Actually, the roots are looking pretty good. I'm seeing a few roots in here that look a little rotten. They're decomposing. But overall, not so much. So what I'm seeing perhaps here, I'm seeing this real light color here. And what that leads me to believe is that she wasn't, when she was watering it, she may not have been doing a thorough watering. And so it's very important that when you water your plants, that you water to the point to where the water runs out the bottom of the pot. Because if you do a lot of really light waterings, or people who just set ice cubes on the top of pots or the soil in a pot to water their plants, what happens is the pot doesn't really ever drain. Now there's one big one that's rotten. And what happens, you get mineral deposits. So our water is not pure. There's like calcium and iron and all kinds of different minerals. And those can build up in the soil. And over time they can become toxic, and at the very least they can discolor the surface of the soil and the roots on the surface. So I'm seeing this discoloration, this kind of ashen kind of, it's just not a color that I'm used to seeing. And I'll show you some of my roots later here, so you can see the difference. Just about there. And I'm also going to be untangling these roots a little bit. So overall, I'm actually pretty pleased. There are some dead roots, but not as many as I suspected. All right. Okay, and we're just about there. I'm going to leave the soil that's clinging to these roots and not disturb those roots too much further. But here's what we're kind of looking at. And there may be one root here that's kind of pointing straight down that I'll probably take off. But we'll do that in just a moment. All right, so let me just show you, since I had mentioned it a few moments ago, the difference in the color that I was noticing. So if we get a shot here of the one that I'm working on, you see that kind of light ashen color that's kind of pale. And then you look at this, you see how dark it is and kind of an auburn, kind of rusty color there. That's the color that the roots should be. So that's why I was concerned about the way she watered. So the longer you grow plants and the more you learn, the more you begin picking up on little visual cues. And this is something I've seen before, not only with bonsai and with the Portulaca, but with just plants in general. When things are being watered properly, when they're being watered partially so that the pot doesn't drain, and things aren't being rinsed, or maybe she just has really hard water. That could be the case as well. Everyone has a little bit different water. In Florida, by the way, does not have the best water quality. We do have a lot of minerals and things in our water, so that could be the case as well. So it is possible she was watering properly, but I do still suspect, because of some of the rotting I've seen, that she was overwatering. She probably also didn't have overhead protection for this plant, meaning that with all the thunderstorms and rains that we had this year, and we probably had over 3 feet of rain this year, and it's just now it's November 1st, okay? So in 11 months, actually, in most of the rain that we had was much earlier in the year. We got like 3 feet of rain in like 5 or 6 months of the year. So it could have been that this plant just stayed too wet. So there is a big difference, and I just want to show that there is a distinct color difference there, and the healthy roots look like this. Unhealthy, kind of discolored roots are beginning to look like this.